Welcome to A Magical Life, Health, Wealth and Weight Loss. I'm your host, Magic Barclay, lead practitioner at Holistic Natural Health Australia and #1 best-selling author. In this podcast, I aim to give you practical tips on how to accelerate and sustain your health, increase your financial, spiritual and emotional wealth, and to look at something that haunts many of us needlessly, weight loss. In some episodes, I'll have guests available to give you even more tips, but in others, the floor is yours. Drop us a line at A Magical Life Podcast on Facebook and let me know what you would like to know more about. Now, sit back and enjoy, because it is time for you to create and truly discover a magical life. Welcome back to A Magical Life. I'm your host, Magic Barclay, and I'm again joined by the lovely Dr. Mary Barson. Dr. Mary is a dedicated general practitioner and weight loss doctor with a passion to empowering people who are suffering with obesity, who may be overweight or live with metabolic disease, helping them to heal their metabolism and lose weight sustainably. Welcome back, Dr. Mary.
Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Now, in episode 56, just to give a bit of a recap, we spoke about what your expertise can do to accelerate health, and you were telling us it's about self-compassion being centre stage of everything that we do, about real food and good nutrition, and really addressing the hormonal causes of weight loss with those factors. We then looked at your top tips to creating wealth, and they were learning to cultivate self-compassion through self-kindness, accepting that we're human, and practicing mindfulness, eating real food, and learning to meditate. Now, when I introduced you in episode 56, we spoke briefly about you dancing badly around the kitchen. I found that quite entertaining, not just because it makes you a real person, which I love my listeners connecting to a realness with my guests. But certainly some people are not the sit quietly and meditate kind of people. For some people, meditation could be dancing to 80s or 90s tunes in the kitchen or in the garden, or having a sing in the shower. It's just that time to decouple from the thought process and to really be centered in the moment. How do you feel about meditation of different types?
Oh, I love it. Absolutely. And I love that word that you used, to decouple the thought process. It's beautiful. So I bang on about meditation a lot. I really do think that it is an incredibly important piece of the puzzle for health and weight loss more generally. And I wish that I could somehow magically have $1 for every time somebody told me, I can't meditate, I can't do it, I just can't quiet my mind, I can't turn it off. It's incredible how often people say that. And to get like the beneficial effects of meditation, you don't need to, sit on a rock at dawn in lotus position and for 45 minutes every day. And you can do that if you want to, absolutely. But there are many, many ways. And essentially what we want to achieve with the meditation is to be mindful for a little while, to be able to absorb ourselves back into the present moment. And there are lots of ways to do that. People can do moving meditation, like when you go for a walk, or I love Qigong. I'm not an expert or anything, but I have my own Qigong practice, which is really very much a moving meditation as I go through the Qigong steps. People could do mindful cooking. So just really absorb yourself in the moment, the texture of the capsicum, the sounds it makes as you chop it, the smells, the sounds of the cooking. That could be a meditation. You could meditate while washing the dishes. You truly could, if you really focus on the feeling of the warm, soapy water, the rhythmic movement of the brush. And when your mind wanders off to the billion things on your to-do list, you just gently bring it back to the warm, soapy water. Like, there are, as many ways to meditate as there are human beings on earth. So there is lots and lots of ways to find your own path to that daily active relaxation.
For me, meditation is 80s music. And, I could have the headphones on, or I could be in the car, and certain tunes will come on and I completely forget about the cares of the world and, any pressures I may be under. And I'm just totally in the song. I'm remembering when I first heard it, what I was doing, how it makes me feel, that really emotive response. And I think for any kind of meditation, you really need to link up to that limbic system or that emotive response. And for some people, that may be sitting quietly in lotus position on a rock. I'm very jealous because I don't do that. But for me, it's the 80s tune that just takes me out of, running around, working, being a mum, all the things that I am every day, all the different hats that I wear. And just for that 3 minutes, 48 seconds, or whatever it may be, just being in the moment. And I think many of us put too much pressure on ourselves with meditation and forget it's just about the moment. It's about the breath, it's about the feeling, and it's about just stepping out of everything else that's going on.
I love that. My most meditative music is 1990s punk, and particularly the drum beats. It's a very sort of specific drum style, and just losing myself in the drum beats, really focusing on the drums as I dance badly in my kitchen with my daughter, who I must say really does dance better than I do, but it's not a competition.
I remember once when my kids were younger and I had the 80s tunes going on while I was doing the vacuuming, and I'm singing, and, I've got the headphones in, so I had no idea how awful I was sounding to them. And they said to me at dinner that night, "Can you stop doing the vacuuming to 80s music?" And I said, "Well, I could, but I'd have to replace it with doing something to 80s music naked around the house." And they both hands down and went, "Keep doing the vacuuming, it's fine. We'll shut our bedroom doors." It's really, when you take yourself to a moment, all the cares of the day just fade away. So listeners, whether it's 90s music, 80s music, sitting on the rock, whatever it is, really give yourself that few minutes a day just to be at peace with who you are. Stop the thought processes that may be going on in the background, the white noise of your brain, and just focus on you.
It's really very, very doable. And it can only be a few minutes. It's amazing that the real power with meditation, and taking time out, for yourself like this, happens with time. So it's far more powerful to, spend a few minutes each day in this sort of meditative state, however you choose to do it, than it is to, do a longer meditation, like a big meditation class once a fortnight or something. It's that they're great. They're great things to do, but it is the daily practice that really does change our brain, and it literally changes the neurological structure of our brain for the better, and it literally changes the hormonal expression in our fight and flight response in our bodies if you do it daily. Small investment, amazingly powerful results.
Absolutely love that. Now, Dr. Mary, we're up to the big topic here, weight loss. So many people want to hear from you all about this, and most of today's episode is dedicated to weight loss. So let's get started. Many people battle their weight needlessly. What was the trigger for you, if you've dealt with it, to lose the weight or release the weight? And how can you help the listeners understand how they can reduce their stress, which we know is a key issue in weight?
Cool. Yeah. All right. So I have it's probably fair to say I had polycystic ovarian syndrome, which is a really common hormonal disorder in women. And it first became quite apparent in my teens when I had really significant issues with acne and started to get some weight gain issues around then as well. And I had irregular periods and some unwanted body hair and all of these other issues, which weren't particularly fun. And I can say that they certainly did bother me. I was a health conscious person from a health conscious family, and I went to my doctor who sent me to a dietitian. And, throughout my 20s, I did everything that I was told to do. I ate a low fat, high carbohydrate diet prescribed by a dietitian, and I exercised like a maniac. I really did because I had time to. I was at university for 10 years. And while I was at university for 10 years, I used to exercise a lot. And I still struggled with my weight. I was always hovering just around that overweight BMI, never ever getting much lower than that. But far more critically than that, I still had polycystic ovarian syndrome. I still had really irregular periods, which was the most troubling thing for me because I was concerned about my fertility moving forward, as well as the acne and the hairiness and things that weren't very fun. But I just kind of thought it was my lot in life, to be honest. And I just got on with my life in other ways, including getting my medical degree and becoming a doctor. And then, working hard at being the best doctor that I could be, a very, very all-consuming process. And I just thought that was it. I'm just destined to, I could be as health conscious as I want, and I'm still just going to struggle with this. And then when I was a fairly young doctor, so I was in my late 20s, and I was doing a palliative medicine rotation in the community palliative care unit. And the wonderful palliative care nurses that I was working with did a 30-day paleo challenge at the local CrossFit gym. And they invited me along, and I didn't know anything about paleo or CrossFit, but I just sort of came along, and we got given a food plan and some exercise, an exercise regime, and I just jumped in. And what I was given was a real food diet, which I didn't really know it at the time, and this one in particular was the low carb real food diet. So it cut out all the bread, the rice, the pasta. This one also cut out starchy veggies like potato and sweet potato and replaced it with low carb veggies, nuts, seeds, and meat, eggs, fish, seafood. It also cut out dairy. And I felt wretched for 2 weeks, really unbelievably bad, far worse than any of the other wonderful people who were doing this challenge with me. And I now discovered that was because I was very insulin resistant and I had high insulin, and I was going through the transition phase or the keto flu. But after those 2 weeks were done, extraordinary things started to happen. I lost weight really easily, which was amazing because I've never easily lost weight in my whole life. But far more amazingly, life-changingly, my periods normalized, my acne went away. All of my polycystic ovarian symptoms just went into remission. And to say that I was shocked is a real understatement. I was gobsmacked. And all I had done, I hadn't increased my exercise, not very much. I was already pretty active. I just changed my diet, and I wasn't even eating less. I wasn't calorie counting. I wasn't hungry or starving. I just changed my food, and miraculous things happened in my body. And so I was incredibly intrigued. And before I was a doctor, I was a scientist. So I actually have got quite good biochemical knowledge and understanding. So I started looking into this and reading the literature. And I discovered that there was a lot that we weren't taught in medical school. We learnt a lot of amazing stuff, We learnt how to keep someone alive after they've been hit by a bus, which is pretty impressive. I love the power of Western medicine to be able to do things like that. But we weren't taught about nutrition. We just weren't. It didn't really come into the curriculum hardly at all. And so I started looking into the science, and I discovered that scientists have actually known about this for a pretty long time. And that the real culprit behind my weight gain was my hormones. And I mean, I kind of knew that because polycystic ovarian syndrome is a hormonal disorder. Everybody knows that. But I didn't know that by changing my nutrition, I could normalize my hormones. And I had this like aha moment. Like it really was like an epiphany where the penny dropped and I realized it's the insulin, stupid. Like I couldn't believe that I didn't realize this before. In polycystic ovarian syndrome is a type of severe insulin resistance. Insulin resistance is a really common disorder and it comes about when people have got elevated insulin and they eat like a high carbohydrate diet. And I had elevated insulin and I was eating my low fat, high carb diet because that's what I was told to do. And I was just making the cycle worse and worse. So insulin.
A lot of people will be going, how will I know if I'm insulin resistant? So what are the most common symptoms of being insulin resistant?
Yeah, so sometimes nothing at all. It can be quite a silent disorder. Other potential symptoms is carbohydrate craving, sugar craving, food craving, feeling tired after meals, feeling tired in the afternoon, feeling tired and feeling the need to eat to sort of boost up your energy. Certainly it being overweight, though people can be insulin resistant without being overweight, but particularly having weight gain around the abdomen and around the organs is a sign of potential insulin resistance.
So very much those apple kind of shapes, which I am, you are more likely or you have a higher propensity to be insulin resistant. And as you said, Dr. Mary, there may be no symptoms at all. But what I've found the most common one is that slump in the afternoon or the feeling of fatigue, after you've been out for dinner or something. And it might not be that you ate a big meal. It's just that unending fatigue after any meal or even after an alcoholic drink, because a lot of alcoholic drinks have high processed sugars in them, and that can trigger off that fatigue feeling. So listeners, we're not saying run out and be scared of being insulin resistant. There is a lot that you can do, which Dr. Mary, you're going to tell us about now.
I am, yeah. I reckon it could be helpful to describe what insulin is. I reckon most people probably have a bit of an idea, but certainly as a doctor, there was one really important thing about insulin that I didn't know, and until I learnt about it after I'd already been a doctor for quite a long time. So insulin is a hormone that's made by our pancreas, and it is released into our bloodstream in tiny amounts, normally tiny amounts, in response to the carbohydrates that we eat. And carbohydrates are sugars and starches such as the starchy foods, bread, rice, pasta, potato. So when we eat sugar or starches, the starches are broken down to sugar almost immediately, like in our saliva. It's like a bowl of pasta is essentially like a bowl of sugar from a biochemical point of view. All that sugar that we eat hits our bloodstream and it can't stay there. High blood sugar is very dangerous. So our body releases this hormone, insulin, and then insulin's job, one of its jobs, is to take the sugar from our bloodstream and to allow it to be converted into fat and stored inside our fat cells. So it takes the sugar and stores it as fat inside our fat cells. The other thing that insulin does is it's our fat storage hormone. Insulin is the master fat storage hormone. And it also inhibits our ability to break down fat. So when insulin is elevated, we can't break down our fat. We can't break down our fat and burn it for fuel. And from our body's point of view, that makes sense. When you're in fat storing mode, there is no point in being in fat burning mode. Our body doesn't want to be storing and burning fat at the same time. And back, from a human evolutionary point of view, this made a lot of sense. But the problem is that a lot of us are insulin resistant. So it means that the body has started to become overwhelmed with the sugars and starches in the diet. It's getting to the point where it can't cope. And the body is needing to make more and more insulin in order to deal with the sugars and starches that we eat. The fat cells start to sort of hide their insulin receptors because they just can't deal with it anymore. And insulin receptors, so the pancreas has to make more and more and more. It has to start sort of screaming at the fat cells, you need to take on this sugar, you need to store more fat. So insulin levels get higher and higher and higher. And while insulin levels are high, as they are in insulin resistance, we can't burn fat. The fat stores are completely inaccessible. My colleague, Dr. Lucy Burns at Real Life Medicine, is like the analogy queen. She's really good at coming up with analogies, and she has a wonderful analogy to describe what insulin does. It's called the woodshed. So if you could imagine that your metabolism, all of the metabolic processes that go on inside your body, it's like a fire. Imagine a fireplace. And this fire needs fuel. And your metabolic fire can run on two fuel types. It can run on kindling, which is the equivalent of carbohydrates, sugars and starches, or it can run on fat, which is like slow burning big logs, big hardwood logs that, you know, really allow the fire to keep going for a long time. And if you've got a normal, healthy metabolism, you can easily switch between the kindling and the logs. You can start the fire, you can burn some kindling for a while, and then you can throw on a log and not feel hungry, not need anything for quite a long time until maybe you get a bit hungry again. You can throw on a little bit more kindling or a log. That's like a metabolically flexible situation. But if you've got insulin resistance and elevated insulin, your logs aren't by the fireplace. That's your fat. The logs are the fat. They're not there easily accessible. They're outside in the woodshed, and the woodshed is locked, and the lock is insulin. So a person with insulin resistance, it doesn't matter how much stored fat they've got, it doesn't matter how many logs are in their woodshed, it's locked and they can't access it. They can only use kindling. They can only use the carbohydrates. And so you can imagine you throw some kindling onto the fire, it burns, and then it dies down. So people feel hungry and tired again. And then the only thing that's going to make them feel better is to eat again, to have a bit more carbs, some sugar, something. And then they get another rush of energy as the kindling gets flown on, and it dies down again. And they can't access those slow burning logs. And the only way for people with insulin resistance to get into those stored fat cells is to lower insulin. Now, that's the best way, is to lower insulin. And, you know, there are two main ways that you can do that. One, and the most important one, is to lower your carbohydrate intake, particularly the processed carbohydrates, which are, you know, your added sugar and processed flours. Not flours as in a bunch of flours, but flours as in, you know, wheat flour and grain flour. In particular, if you reduce those, then insulin can start to come down. That woodshed can be unlocked and people can start burning their logs again and really have wonderful, sustainable energy throughout the day, as well as losing body fat.
What a fantastic analogy. That is so easy for people to understand insulin and fat burning. Now, you talk keto and paleo. Many people, we've all heard the buzzwords. Let's face it, you know, so many people out there have been talking about it. But what actually is it? Let's break this down so that the listeners can have an idea of doing keto, what does it mean? Doing paleo, what does it mean? Like, what sort of macros do you need to be successful? And how can you easily implement it? And certainly, on a flip side of that question, how can mums or dads or busy business people or whoever's out there listening saying, well, that's all fine and good, how can I apply it so that my family or my colleagues can easily follow it?
Yeah, great question. So for our food philosophy at Real Life Medicine, we don't use the term paleo or keto, though, I mean, I think they're fine. What our food philosophy at Real Life Medicine is low carb, real food. And there's two bits to that. To start off, the real food, I think that everybody, even people who do not have a weight loss goal, can benefit from real food. Children can benefit from real food. Many people actually don't need to worry about their carbohydrate intake, but if they eat real food, then they will do wonders for their body and heal many, many, many deranged metabolic processes. So real food is food as close as possible to its natural state when it was plucked from the vine, plucked from the tree, pulled from the ground, or taken from the animal. So real food is vegetables, nuts, fruits, seeds. It's meat, eggs, fish, seafood. That's real food. And if you focus on having all of your meals on those, then you are going to be doing really well. However, if you are also insulin resistant, with elevated insulin, that might not be enough. It might be, but it might not be. If people have elevated insulin, then that woodshed needs to get unlocked and insulin needs to come down. So then we talk about taking it a step further by eating low carbohydrate real food. LCRF, low carb real food. LCRF is what we talk about. So low carb is you remove the high carbohydrate real foods from the diet. So the sugary fruits and the starchy vegetables like potato, sweet potato. And depending on how strict people need to go, that might also include limiting pumpkin and other vegetables that grow underground and instead focusing on veggies that grow above ground. So, I mean, we have a whole 12-week program where we teach people how to implement the real food and the mindset with going low carb real food. But it can be really, really easy in that choosing the low carb real food is easy. And we teach a skill called build your plate, where it's really simple. You visualize your meal by picking your protein and having maybe a hand-sized piece of protein, and the half of your plate is filled with low-carb veggies or low-carb salad, and then having maybe 1 to 2 tablespoons of fat so that the meal is nice and satiating with as much seasoning and salt and other things that you like. So it's a pretty easy strategy. And when it comes to counting your macros, I don't. I do every now and again. The only reason I bother counting my macros, counting the grams of protein, of carbohydrate and fat that I eat, is so that I can keep up the skill, so that I can teach people if they want to. But I actually don't believe that it is at all necessary. Some people really want to, and that's fine. So if people are just eating low carb and they're choosing low carb foods and building their plate with that idea of the protein, making sure you get enough of that, then adding in the veggies and the salad and just enough fat to make sure it's a satiating meal, then that's all you need to do. And just aim for 2 or 3 meals a day, no snacks, and stick at that. That can be enough. Sometimes people do want to really zero in and be really, really targeted and specific about it. And then you can count your macros. And the main macro that we are interested in is the carbohydrates. So you mentioned the word keto, which is short for ketogenic diet. And I don't necessarily advocate people have to be on a ketogenic diet to lose weight and to get well, but they can be. So a low carb diet will work. A ketogenic diet will also work. The difference between a low carb and a ketogenic diet is that a ketogenic diet is when you get your carbohydrates so low that your liver makes more of these structures called ketone bodies. So ketone bodies are just a natural source of fuel that our cells can use. And most of our cells, almost all the cells in our body, will happily fuel themselves on glucose. Some will fuel themselves on fatty acids and fat directly, and some will fuel themselves on ketones. And if we're on a low carb diet and we're eating very low carb, so that like carbohydrate intake is less than probably about 20 grams for most people per day, then the body will naturally go into this state called nutritional ketosis, where it starts making more ketone bodies. It's always making a tiny bit. The liver's always pumping out a bit of ketones, but the ketone production really pumps up. And you don't need to be in nutritional ketosis to lose weight on a low carb diet. And indeed, people can be in nutritional ketosis and not losing weight. Many athletes like to use nutritional ketosis as their sort of fueling strategy, and they're already lean and they're not losing weight. All that being in nutritional ketosis means is that you are burning fat. Your body is taking the fat and using that as a fuel source. So it's kind of a good indicator that you are able to burn fat. You're in a fat burning state. Your insulin is low enough that you're burning fat. But other than that, it's not essential to weight loss, certainly not from the way that we teach and the way that we use in our coaching programs. So that's nutritional ketosis. You want to aim for macros less than about 20 grams for most people. A more moderate low carb diet is what we would advocate for people, and that's probably less than 50, 60 grams of carbs a day. That's still quite low. People may or may not be in nutritional ketosis with that, but that is generally low enough to really lower insulin. And then there's more moderate low carb diets where people would have, less than 150 grams a day. So there's a wide variety, and a lot of self-experimentation needs to go ahead to see what sort of works for people. But how we do it is we've got lists of food. We've got green lists and red lists and orange lists. And the idea is that you pick foods from the green list, you avoid foods from the red list. And you can sprinkle in a bit of orange foods here and there if you want to. And the green list foods are just what I described: low carb veggies, meat, eggs, fish, seafood, nuts, seeds, good quality healthy fats, as well as a few low sugar fruits such as berries. And when people make those as their meals, then you can't lose. You don't need to overthink it. It actually can be incredibly easy. I pride myself on making most of my meals in 10 minutes or less, tasty meals. And so it's super. It can be as easy as you want it to be. I can have dinner on the table in far less time than it would take to go through the Macca's drive-through. And it's a delicious, satisfying meal as well. And in terms of feeding the family, there's many ways you can do this. I'm insulin resistant because I have polycystic ovarian syndrome that's now in remission, but I can't tolerate carbohydrates the way that my partner and my daughter can. They're metabolically flexible. They can eat as many carbs as they want. So as a family, we focus on having real food, but I'm the only one who bothers to reduce her carbohydrates. So typically a meal for us, let me have a think. Okay, so last night we had a sort of meatball tomato-y stew that I made. And I just had the meatball and tomato stew. So it had some tomatoes and veggies and some meatballs in there. And that's what I ate. It was really tasty. And my partner and daughter ate that with some, I think they had baked sweet potato. So they had just the extra carbs. And that's kind of often how we will structure our meals. I guess that's how it works for our family. We have our real food and I eat the low carb options, and then they can have their extra carby options if they choose.
So that sounds really sustainable and attainable for anyone. Now, I've spoken to the listeners in previous episodes about environmental connection, and that is that we are only one species. We are not the be-all and end-all of planet Earth, and that we really need to caretake and appreciate all other species, and that includes plants and animals. So definitely the low-carb, real food options do encourage environmental connection, because you grab an apple from the tree, you don't get a packet of sliced apple. That doesn't come from the tree. And so therefore you're reducing your plastic waste, you're reducing your carbon imprint and your, damage to what the earth can provide us. You're really creating that environmental connection using real food as medicine. How do you feel about environmental connection with the food?
I think that environmental connection to our food is incredibly important. I love that you've brought that up from a purely nutritional point of view and and I am not purely focused on the nutritional aspect of it, but from a nutritional point of view, when you pick animals to eat that have been grass-fed beef, grass-fed lamb, if you pick chicken or poultry meat or eggs from chickens that have been free range and grass-fed and been able to pastured, been able to sort of roam free on green pastures, then the food is much more nutritious. It has got a much better nutritional balance of omega-3 and omega-6 fatty acids. Same with sustainably caught fish rather than intensively farmed fish. And I think it's incredibly important to be connected to our food. Yeah, as you walk through the supermarket, it's so easy to be disconnected from where our food comes from. You see the chicken breast wrapped in plastic and you don't necessarily think about its provenance, the life that animal might have had. Or you see some tomato flavored crackers in the cracker aisle and they've got a picture of a tomato on them, and you somehow sort of think that is connected to the real food, even though these foodstuffs, these food-like substances were created in a factory, have no resemblance to real food, and indeed cause havoc with our internal biochemistry. Having a connection to our food also improves that gratitude. And gratitude is really, I think, important and really useful for well-being. I grew up in the country, and this is not something I would, necessarily advocate everybody needs to experience, but I grew up in the country, and my parents had a pretty strong views that if we ate the meat, we needed to understand where it came from, as well as if we were eating the veggies, we had to help out in the vegetable garden. And we needed to understand where food comes from and what food is. And I had to help. I had to help pluck the geese. I had to help. We grew our own lamb, and we had these animals that we both sold for meat and that we ate ourselves. And it was our responsibility to give these animals a really good life, to make sure that they were safe and well cared for, that they had a very nourishing diet of just grass, because that's what they need. So they were well pastured. And then in the end, they were treated really humanely. And so I do feel very strongly that connection to food is important, and you probably don't need to take it to the same extremes that I did as a child necessarily, but certainly think about your food and think about whether or not it is real. How many steps did this particular foodstuff go through before it got to me? Is it just a single ingredient carrot or a delicious tomato? Is it just a single ingredient egg? Or is it highly processed with lots of ingredients? And if it's the latter, then it's very unlikely to be good for you.
Thank you, Dr. Mary. I think we'll wrap it up there. We've had 2 amazing episodes, and thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming onto the podcast. Just to remind our listeners that you can find Dr. Mary on Instagram at real_life_medicine, and on Facebook at Real Life Medicine, which is all one word, and pop along to Dr. Mary's website, www.rlmedicine.com. So, Dr. Mary, we love to give our listeners some freebies here. So what freebie can you offer them, and where can they find it?
I would love for you guys to have a free ebook that we've created, Doctor's Guide to Weight Loss. And you can find this on our website, www.rlmedicine.com. And if you go to free stuff, it'll be there for you. There's also a guide on emotional eating, which I think is incredibly important and a really valuable tool.
Thank you so much. Folks, this was episode 57 of A Magical Life. Coming up in episode 58, I'll be talking to you about your money story, the story that you currently tell yourself and the story that you need to write to turn around your financial situation. So again, thank you, Dr. Mary, for episodes 56 and 57. And listeners, please go forth and create your magical life. Thanks for listening today. Please subscribe to hear future episodes, leave a review, and share this podcast. You can follow us on Facebook at A Magical Life Podcast or at Holistic Natural Health Australia. That's holistic with a W. You can find us on Instagram at Holistic Natural Health or at www.holisticnaturalhealth.com.au. That's where you'll access all sorts of articles, freebies, and more.